We already know this one. I'm going to repeat one more time to remind you that, remember, hemoglobin is composed of iron, and iron would be ferrous, would be Fe2 plus, not Fe3 plus. If iron changed to Fe3 plus, that hemoglobin is called methemoglobin. Methemoglobin has less affinity for oxygen than a normal hemoglobin. Normally, we have a small amount of methemoglobin in our RBC. When methemoglobin inside the RBC increases, then that is going to make your hemoglobin to become denatured. A denatured hemoglobin inside the RBC is going to precipitate and is going to turn into something that's called Heinz body. You can see Heinz body with the light microscopy. Heinz body is going to damage the cell membrane of RBC. As a result, the RBC is going to get damaged when it's going to go through the spleen and liver or bone marrow. So methemoglobin, if it's going to increase, is going to cause your RBC to die faster. Why some people they have methemoglobin? Remember, methemoglobin is when Fe2 plus change to Fe3 plus. That means it's going to become oxidized. Anything that is oxidizing agent can create methemoglobin. For instance, nitrite is an oxidizing agent, or sulfonamide. Sulfonamide is a group of medication that some people they take, and one of the side effects is turning your hemoglobin into methemoglobin. And you're going to learn about this sulfonamide later in pharmacology. Another reason that some people they have too much methemoglobin is congenital variation. In my body and your body, when we create methemoglobin, we have enzyme inside the RBC that is called methemoglobin reductase that is going to reduce methemoglobin back to normal hemoglobin. Genetically, some people they are missing this enzyme, and if you don't have this enzyme, you're going to increase the amount of methemoglobin, and increasing the amount of methemoglobin increase the chance of Heinz body. Carbon monoxide has a very high affinity for hemoglobin. If you have CO in the blood, the affinity of CO for hemoglobin is 210 times more than affinity for oxygen. So in other words, if you have enough CO first going to attach to hemoglobin, there is going to be no seats available for oxygen. CO poisoning is dangerous because CO is going to stick to the hemoglobin and there is no room for oxygen to sit. Remember that one hemoglobin carries 4 oxygen. If only 2 of them is occupied, then 50% is saturated. If 3 of them is occupied, that means 75% is saturated. So saturation means how many of these seats are occupied by oxygen. Normally, the saturation is around 97%. That means if 97 seats out of 100 seats are occupied, the saturation is 97%. Who is going to increase saturation of this hemoglobin? We mentioned a few minutes ago, PaO2. When PaO2 goes up, it's going to give this oxygen to the hemoglobin and increase the saturation. If your PaO2 drops, then saturation of hemoglobin also is going to drop. Can we see the relationship between saturation of oxygen and PaO2? How does this relationship work? Is it linear? The answer is no, it's not linear. The shape of this relationship is sigmoid shape, just like this. This is the pressure of oxygen, and this is the saturation. As you can see, when the pressure of oxygen increases, saturation is going to increase, but not in a linear format, but in the sigmoid format. If the pressure of oxygen is 100, which is 100 in our blood almost, then as you can see, we said 97%. It's not 100%. It's only 97% is occupied. You see that? The curve doesn't reach to 100. So in the pressure of 100, only 97% of hemoglobin is saturated. Realize in this part of this curve, it's almost plateau. It's almost flat. In other words, if you decrease PaO2 from 100 to, let's say, 80, still the saturation is going to stay around 95%. If we get even to 60, you can see in the pressure of 60, my hemoglobin is saturated by 90%. So therefore, I'm not worried about a patient that PaO2 is going to be 60 millimeters of mercury, because I know between 60 and 100, the saturation is above 90%, which is pretty good. However, I don't want to see anything less than 60, because as soon as my PaO2 is going to drop below 60, I'm going to get to this part of the curve, which is pretty steep. That means dramatically the saturation is going to drop as soon as you go below 60 milliliter of mercury. Look at this one. What is the pressure of oxygen inside the vein? 40. What is the saturation of the hemoglobin in vein? The answer is 75%. You may think 75% is pretty good, 3 out of 4. It's not, because you are in the steep portion of this curve. So therefore, in the clinic, we always want to see the pressure of oxygen above 60 or above 90% saturation of hemoglobin, because as soon as you come down this pressure, you're going to reach this steep area. As you can see, dramatically your saturation is going to drop. As soon as you go from 60 to 40, as you can see, your saturation is going to drop by 15 points. And as soon as you go from 40 to 20, the saturation is going to drop by 30%. So it's pretty dangerous. There is a specific number that I want you to know, and that is P50. At the pressure of 25 milliliter of mercury, as you can see, 50% of your hemoglobin is saturated. That is called P50. Is the pressure of the oxygen in the blood that 50% of hemoglobin is saturated. We use this one as a criteria. I'll show you why in a few minutes. This curve is called oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Let's take a look at this diagram. Forget about this green and yellow one for now. Look at the middle one, this one. This one is a normal one, that one we talked about. At the pressure of 100, we said the saturation is 97%. What does it mean if I move this curve to the right or if I move this curve to the left? Well, the yellow one is the one that moved to the left and the green one is the one that moved to the right. What does that mean? What is going to happen if the curve moves to the right? Well, if the curve moves to the right, as you can see, at any given pressure, let's say 100, normally at the pressure of 100, 97% of your hemoglobin is saturated. But you can see when you move the curve to the left, at the pressure of 100, your saturation decreased. Or let's take a look at the pressure of 60. We said at the pressure of 60, the saturation is 90%, as you can see. If the curve moves to the right, the saturation is going to drop to, let's say, 82. When the curve moves to the right, the saturation of hemoglobin is going to drop. If you look at P50, in the normal situation was 25, if you remember. But if the curve moves to the right, my P50 is going to increase. That means I have to have a higher pressure to reach 50%. So I have to go to around, 32 to get to the 50%. So if my curve moves to the right, the hemoglobin saturation is going to drop and my P50 gets bigger. That means the higher pressure is needed to increase the saturation. On the other hand, if the curve moves to the left, that means my hemoglobin saturation is going to improve. The affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen is going to go up. For instance, in the pressure of 60, as you can see, normally is 90%, but when the curve moves to the left, my saturation is going to change to 96, 97%. Or P50, which is normally 25, is going to give me 50%. When the curve moves to the left, as you can see, the pressure of 20 is going to give me 50%. So when the curve is going to move to the right and left, the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen is going to change. But what does that mean, curve is going to move to the right or left? How in the world curve is going to move to the right or left? Well, the answer is some changes in your blood can shift this curve. For instance, as you can see in this picture, the normal pH of the blood is 7.4. If your blood becomes more acidic, the curve is not going to be in this shape, it's going to be in this shape. In other words, when blood becomes acidic, the curve is going to move to the right. That means hemoglobin is going to lose its affinity for oxygen. Hemoglobin is going to let the oxygen go faster. Change of pH is going to move this curve to the right or left. If the blood becomes acidic, curve is going to move to the right. If the blood becomes alkaline, curve is going to move to the left. Again, for the last time, when the curve moves to the left, that means the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen is going to increase. That means hemoglobin is going to hold on to oxygen. So now think about it. The blood pH is around 7.4 in average. But do you think the pH at the tissue where the cells are doing metabolism is 7.4 or slightly less than 7.4? I think where the cells do metabolism, cells are going to produce more CO2, and more CO2 means more acidic. That means at the tissue level, the pH is going to be slightly less than 7.4. So that means at the tissue level, hemoglobin is going to let the oxygen go because the affinity of the hemoglobin for oxygen is going to decrease when the pH becomes more acidic. At the level of the lung, you're exhausting CO2. So therefore, at the level of the lung, probably your pH is slightly more than 7.4 because you're losing CO2 at the lung. So that means at the lung level, your curve is going to be slightly toward left. That means at the level of the lung, your hemoglobin has more affinity for oxygen. So that's another reason that hemoglobin is going to go to lung and grab the oxygen, is going to come to the tissue and let the oxygen go. This idea that pH is going to change the curve to the right or left is called Bohr effects. Is there anything else that moves the curve to the right or left? The answer is yes, temperature. Look at this one. When the temperature goes up, the curve is going to move to the right. When the temperature goes down, the curve is going to move to the left. Now think about it. When you do metabolism at the tissue, do you create more heat? Yes, metabolism is going to create heat. So at the level of the tissue, when you do metabolism, the temperature is slightly higher than body temperature. So that means when hemoglobin comes to the tissue, when the temperature is slightly higher, the curve is going to move to the right and hemoglobin wants to release this oxygen. However, as you know, we exhaust heat through breathing also. So at the lung level, pretty much the temperature is slightly less than 37. So therefore, at the lung, hemoglobin has more affinity for oxygen. It's going to grab the oxygen at the lung and it's going to come to the tissue and let the oxygen go. Higher temperature, move the curve to the right, and lower temperature is going to move the curve to the left. So far we learned two reasons for curve moves to the right or left. The third one that you must know is called 2 and 3 DPG. Do you remember 2 and 3 DPG or 2 and 3 BPG, like boy? We talked about this one before, if you recall. When we talked about glycolysis, we said one of the byproduct of glycolysis is 2 and 3 BPG. When you create 2 and 3 BPG, your curve is going to move to the right. If you don't create 2 and 3 BPG, the curve is going to move to the left. 2 and 3 BPG is going to attach to beta chain of the hemoglobin and decrease the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So when 2 and 3 BPG is going to attach to hemoglobin, hemoglobin doesn't want oxygen. When 2 and 3 BPG is not attached to hemoglobin, hemoglobin likes oxygen. So when do you create 2 and 3 BPG? When you do glycolysis. The more you do glycolysis, the more of this one you produce. If you don't do glycolysis, you don't produce 2 and 3 BPG. If you're living high altitude, the pressure of the air is lower. As a result, the pressure of oxygen inside the blood is lower. As a result, the RBC must circulate faster to carry more oxygen. In high altitude, the RBC is going to do more glycolysis because it's going to work harder. And more glycolysis, that means more 2 and 3 BPG. That means hemoglobin is going to let the oxygen go faster, and that's exactly what you want. The same is true about anemia. If you don't have enough hemoglobin, if you don't have enough RBC, if you cannot carry enough oxygen, then the rest of the RBC in the blood, they have to work harder. Working harder, that means they produce more 2 and 3 BPG. That is going to shift the curve to the right. That means hemoglobin is going to let the oxygen go, and that's exactly what you need. You want in the patient with anemia to let the oxygen go faster and give oxygen to the cells.